Oh, yes. Pale blood.
Are you that outsider?
Wretched outsider.
I don't reckon you're from round here.
It's all your fault!
I know that you hunt for
You're
us.
sure to be in a fine
What's that smell?
We are
Dark
born
outside
of the
and the
blood.
night of the hunt.
Sweet blood.
Made men by the blood.
Seems to me.
You found yourself a hunter.
Out of all of my favorite games, out of all of the titles I've played throughout my lifetime, nothing quite hits different than Bloodborne. Which, I know, not the most original take, but it's still true, and it's the reason why I'm into the Soulsborne genre of games in the first place. And since it's kind of Elden Ring's big year, I thought it'd be a great time to look back at one of its many influences. The truth is, while I love Elden Ring, and it was definitely my game of the year, I still personally like Bloodborne more. And if you've never had the chance to play this game due to one of its many exclusivities, and you happen to now have the opportunity to check it out, I want to go on a deeper dive of what made this game so special, and why so many people find it special. And if you've never played the game, or you're just new to FromSoftware's catalog in general, maybe you'll want to check it out. Or maybe if you're just trying to see if there's something other than Elden Ring that would interest you. Maybe this would be the game from Hidetaka Miyazaki that catches your eye. Because in my opinion, despite it all, I believe Bloodborne remains the best. So I feel like most people know what Bloodborne is. People have seen one of its many iconic aesthetics and they know immediately, that's Bloodborne, even if they've never played it in their life. I mean, there's hardly anything that has the exact same art direction. And getting this out of the way now, that is the single most perfect thing in Bloodborne. I'd argue it's one of the single greatest art directions in video game history. So let's start there with the world of Bloodborne. There are tons of videos about why this game's aesthetic is particularly good. And while certainly Bloodborne is elevated by its knowledge of its influences, it's just that. At its core, the game is about the fear of the unknown, and stepping into this world without any prior knowledge is how you should experience it. So instead of going down a long-winded history lesson about its influences, I'll just tell you what it's like being in this world and absolutely suffering from the fact that the world is so terrifying, but at the same time, so beautiful that you can't help but want to see more. So, waking up to the nightmare, as they call it, you slowly accumulate yourself to a world that is dark, dreary, and ruined. The city of Yharnam opens up with an ominous orange sky and the cries of people. Or at least, you think it's a person. The screams are far more beast-like, and it hinges on the line of uncanny. There's not even a soundtrack to keep you company most of the time. Just the sounds of the now fallen city. But don't worry, there is a soundtrack to this game, and it goes so hard. You understand that you are in a whole new world, with a deep history you do not know. But at the same time, the world feels familiar. Its Victorian Gothic aesthetic is recognizable. Like those fairy tale stories you grew up with, and the worlds that you grew up dreaming about, those have become flipped on their head and are now your personal nightmare. On top of that, its use of religious imagery with its many churches and beautifully designed stone statues are also very recognizable, but they've been skewed. It reminds you of that church you grew up passing by, whose parking lot was always empty, so you couldn't imagine it's still in use, right? But what if it was the center for something far sinister? See, that is where Bloodborne's true beauty lies. It feeds off of the horrors of the unknown. It fills in the blanks of all of the times you let your imagination run wild, and you ended up scaring yourself. And not only do you have to see them, you have to fight them, head on. And just when you feel like you're getting used to the world, and you decide that you're a hunter and not a pussy anymore, the nightmare evolves. It no longer feeds on that fear of fantasy worlds, but on the desire for knowledge and dealing with things humans were never meant to interact with. Your worst fear is now just simply knowledge. monsters get more and more absurd to the point where you almost can't pinpoint anything that looks like it. Its use of horror and fear of things we were never meant to see makes it one of the best uses of Lovecraftian horror in the modern age. But don't worry, you don't have to know what Lovecraftian horror is to make your experience of Bloodborne better. But as I mentioned, you have to fight the monsters of this world. You are a hunter after all. So what is the gameplay like, and just how do you fight back against the horrors of the nightmare? So, confession time. I didn't always like Bloodborne. I know, pretty blasphemous. But when the game was first announced, I remember absolutely falling in love with the aesthetic. I also remember that they would drop the designs and concept art leading up to the game, and I would trace the hunter into my bio notebook. And then when the game finally came out, I was so excited, and I was ready to play it. And when I finally did, I couldn't even make it past the Great Bridge. It was frustrating, it was so hard for me. But God, if I could go back in time, I wish I could grab little Dan by the collar and whisper in his ear, "Get good." Because eventually, I did. Albeit my frontal cortex had developed a few more years. The truth was, I was just playing the game wrong. I was slashing like a maniac thinking this was a Dynasty Warriors game. Or spam the attack button like someone who plays Kingdom Hearts and doesn't understand there are other buttons on your controller. See, the secret to Bloodborne is that it rewards you for two things: exploration and finesse. But before I start talking about getting good, I should definitely mention that this is still the most accessible Soulsborne game in terms of combat, skills, and equipment. The one thing that sets apart Bloodborne from its counterparts is that it actually tries to take away from the focus of equipable loot. Once you have that starting weapon and armor, you can fully beat the game with that loadout. And I don't mean in a starting equipment level 1 no flash run kind of way. The game keeps a focus on leveling your stats with your blood and upgrading equipment. Think of your starting equipment like your starter Pokemon. That shit sticks with you to the endgame. But that doesn't mean that there aren't cool armor sets and equipment to find. In fact, I'd argue that some of the weapons in this game are cooler than any other Soulsborne game. I mean, where do you think the pizza cutter came from? So instead of grinding dungeons for equipment, you're just grinding for blood, thus allowing progression to be streamlined and pretty easy to understand once you get it. And then when you do look for equipment, it's tied to the lore and some really cool side quests. Honestly, one of my favorite things about the direction and lore of this game is that they explain to you in the game that the beasts of this world forced the Hunter's Workshop to develop weapons outside of the normal medieval ones like swords and bows. So they specifically started creating these demonous looking weapons to fit the scope of killing monsters. It kind of sounds like something that's simple in retrospect and kind of a no-brainer, especially because Monster Hunter kind of did it first. But I just don't like it when stories that are focused around killing monsters only use like swords. Anyways, I'm getting off topic, but I did mention exploration. And speaking of exploration, your ears are as much of a tool in this world as your eyes, as this game awards the player who stops and listens. Sometimes items will have a certain ring to them, or maybe you'll hear music from afar, which is where you're supposed to go. Or even when you're just hearing something ominous, you just know that something bad is coming your way, and maybe you should start panic rolling just in case. The best thing I can tell a new player to this game, or any Souls game, is that there is no shame in running. The first area is particularly a sign of this because it features one of the largest mob groups in the entire game. Do not try to fight everything at once. Exploit everything you can. Terrain, AI, enemy movement speed, even doors. Doors are a pretty big one. Doors will get you out of a pinch. Run. Fight as many mobs one-on-one as you can, and don't be afraid of using everything in your arsenal. Speaking of which, this game teaches you how to get good at parrying. The parrying system in this game gets me hyped every single time. So instead of a shield, you get a gun. The gun isn't for dealing damage, it is your shield. See, there's a small window of time while an enemy is charging for an attack where you can shoot them and they'll get stunned. leaving you open for what is called a visceral attack, which is a fully animated, invincible attack that allows you to do mega damage. What makes this feature so cool, other than, just parrying people with a gun, is that you're forced to get good at timing. Most enemies won't get stun locked, so if you miss the timing, you'll take the full force of a hit. And no joke, you become a better gamer because of it. For example, when I was playing God of War a couple weeks ago and doing that gauntlet or whatever, it became so much easier when I started treating the combat like it was a Soulsborne game. And to leave you off with the best advice I could possibly give you, if you decide to use the saw cleaver as your starting weapon, the combo to win the entire game is R1, R1, L1, R1. This combat allows you to switch the weapon mode at the end of your combo, which does significantly more damage. Most of the time, it's enough damage to kill your enemy before they can hit you. I should stop here before I start backseating your entire experience. So lastly, let's talk about the insanity, which is Bloodborne's story and characters. So if you want a straightforward answer of how to understand this plot and what the plot is of this game, the easiest thing I can tell you is to go watch a VaatiVidya video on it. So I'm going to try to do something different, which is to try and tell you how to receive the maximum enjoyment of the story. The truth about this game is that there is a great chance that you'll finish it without knowing 100% of what you just did. Honestly, there's a solid chance you'll finish this game without knowing 70% of what has transpired at all. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, the objective of the game is to end the hunt, which means you beat up a few monsters, you get to the end, you fight the thing that causes the hunt, and bing bang boom, you're done. It's still a satisfying gaming experience. But as I mentioned, this game has a heavy emphasis on knowledge and insight. Look past the mundaneness of the mindless fighting and question why. Why are you doing any of this? Why is the world this way? Why do I not die when I get killed? Why am I getting this power from the doll? And why can I see things now versus not earlier in the game? And why the fuck are these characters' voices so hot? Ask these questions and seek the answers. The lore and plot is riddled throughout the world. Soulsborne games are kind of known for their anti-exposition cutscenes. You'll never understand the story just based on watching the game. But there are NPCs and notes under every item who will gladly answer your every question about the lore. And speaking of NPCs, the NPCs in this game send chills down my spine every time I meet one. The voice acting is top notch. Special shout out to every VA in this game because they are a huge chunk of why this game's aesthetic works. And listen to what they say, because they don't say a lot, but they infer many things. So don't just be an active player in this game. Be an active audience member to its story, and it will reward you in many ways. There are many people who will try and tell you that all you need to do is just read some wiki page or watch some YouTube channel to save yourself time. But that's not fun. Uncovering the world's secrets and being rewarded for your findings is much more fun. And then, when you've done all you can and you finish the game, then go look stuff up. That's how you add to the enjoyment of the game. Look, there are a million videos on Bloodborne. Some about its horror, some about its story, some about its mechanics, and all of those videos can do a better job of telling those things better than I can. But for me, the thing that really grabs me about a piece of media is getting lost in its world, feeling like I'm a part of it, having my brain chemistry changed by the experiences I've had by interacting with it. You get attached more than any other medium, and Bloodborne is one of my favorite examples of that. And it does it in a way that literally no other piece of media does for me. I go back to Yharnam at least once a year, just to see if I can find new things or test out new strategies. And every single time, I'm rewarded for it. I've done quite a few playthroughs, and I feel like there's still so much for me to try out. One of my biggest criteria of a game is its replayability. And if there's a definitive ranking of my favorite games based on replayability, Bloodborne is probably 2, right behind maybe Skyrim. But you also don't have to replay this game to enjoy it. One run is all it takes, and you still feel accomplished and satisfied by the end of it. So maybe if you're looking for the right Soulsborne game to get you hooked on FromSoftware, or maybe you're just tired of killing millennia for the 5th time, the nightmare awaits you. And those in the hunter's dream will rejoice knowing they found themselves a hunter. So, as of this recording, it's approximately 3.5 hours before the video game awards start. And that means that I'm about to figure out if this video either aged really well or really poorly. Regardless, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and a comment. If you're new to my channel, hello. If you're coming back, thanks for coming back. And if you're not a subscriber, feel free to subscribe. I make video essays and reviews like this, so feel free to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys next time.
Well, at least our schools